to our discussion of the theory of reasoned action. Before we begin, let me give you a little bit of a rationale as to why we look at so many different theories in the class. Theory is important because it's the basis for creating an informed campaign. It helps us to create effective messages, develop a good needs assessment, identify our objectives, and measure the outcomes of particular campaigns. So in discussing this theory, I'm going to take a look at the background, components, limitations, and applications of the theory of reasoned action. So I think it's a nice place to begin by getting to know the authors of the theory just a little bit. The primary author for the theory of reasoned action was Martin Fishbein. We only recently lost him, and as you can see from his resume, he had a pretty holy cow kind of a career. In short, one of the reasons to understand who the authors are to see some of the applications and some of the real-world work that academics and researchers in persuasion do. This is one of the fields of communication where we literally affect lives. And that's kind of the neat part about persuasion research, is that it should be about reaching out and doing good in order to help people. So Martin Fishbein is the preliminary author on TRA, and the secondary author is really Isaac Azan. Now, he's a former student of Fishbein, which is what you find a lot of times in academia when you see two authors who work a lot together. It's pretty common that it was a student-professor kind of relationship during graduate school that then, because of mutual interests, grows into really a lifelong opportunity for collaboration. So, these two guys really, they got together early in the 1960s and 70s, and they were frustrated with where the field of attitude and voluntary behavior was. We didn't really understand what drove people to volitional behavior or voluntary behavior. So the theory was born out of frustration. In a lot of research, there are weak correlations between attitude and voluntary behavior. There was something missing. You know, we talked about when we discussed attitudes that there is not a perfect correlation between your attitude and your behavior. Attitude is a good indicator, but it wasn't the thing that was really driving it. So what they were trying to do was understand the relationships that really drove behaviors. And so they began with a couple of relationships. And what we're going to do is we'll walk through each of the components of the theory one at a time. So they started with the assumption, and then tested this through quite a lot of research, that our behavioral intention often leads to our behavior. That was kind of the truth of our attitude, what we are planning on doing. That's a good indicator of what our actual behavior is going to be. So think of behavioral intention as my New Year's resolution. You know, if I make a New Year's resolution to exercise every day, and I say I'm committed to this, that's my behavioral intention. Now the behavior is then whether I actually do that or not. So in trying to figure out what then affected behavioral intention, Fishbein and Azan came up with several factors. First, our attitudes. So think of the attitude as our beliefs about the behavior. You know, do we think that this is a behavior that's actually going to benefit us in the end? We talked about this when we talked about attitudes and the formation of them, etc. But it's not just enough to have an attitude about the outcome of the behavior. We also have to feel like those outcomes are going to be beneficial for us. So if I think that exercising every day is going to help me out, I form a positive attitude about exercise. And if I have a positive attitude about exercise, hopefully that informs my intention to exercise every day, thus leading to the behavior. But it's not just attitude. This is where it gets a little bit more complex, because if we did everything that we had a positive attitude about, we'd probably be a lot healthier, happier. But there's a second component in here. The subjective norm. The subjective norm is really much more about our belief about the desirability of the behavior. When we talk about exercise, is it something that people view as a good thing? Is being healthy valued in your society? Subjective norms focus on the social desirability or the acceptability of the behaviors that we're ultimately trying to get to. So we create this, but we have to understand the belief about the behavior is desirable to specific others. See, it's not just whether there's a general social desirability, as in, does society in general care about what we do? That's not who we're concerned about when we're making decisions. Who we're concerned about are the people that we care about, our family, our friends. So if we're doing something, we think about what others are going to think about it, the people close to us. So it's a belief about the behavior as being desirable. If someone thinks that, exercise is just going to inconvenience you, or it's going to hurt you, or whatever the case may be, and they start voicing that opinion, we may be worried that they're going to approve. Now, exercise is probably a bad example of this, but let me give you a different example. In Africa, one of the key problems with people even getting tested for HIV is that their family and their friends have such a strong stigma against people who are HIV positive that they're afraid that if they are tested and they find out that they're HIV positive, that they're going to be shunned by their community. And in fact, that belief and that concern is well grounded. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about the subjective norm, is that the belief that the behavior is desirable to the people who matter to us. But not only that, but the subjective norm is also about whether we care about those people's beliefs, or our motivation to comply with them. Let me give you kind of a silly example. I have a lot of tattoos because I like tattoos. I have a positive attitude towards them. But one of the things that I thought about before I got my first one at 18 was whether my folks would like that or not. Now, at 18, I was still kind of, it mattered what they thought, let's say in the grand scheme of the universe. And I knew that they wouldn't like it. So that was the negative component, the belief about the behaviors being desirable from the specific other. My folks, I knew, wouldn't really like it. Yet, my motivation to comply with their belief was pretty small. In the grand scheme of things, I wasn't going to make the decision to put or not put something on my body because my folks might not like it. So what ended up happening was that I got it and concealed it. Now my mom, being, moms and less obnoxious about things usually, depends on the mom, she saw and she was like, "Why do you do that to your body?" My father didn't see any of my tattoos for a good decade. Now, did it stop me from getting them? No, because my motivation to comply with their beliefs was pretty low. But it was certainly something that I thought about and had to weigh in consideration. So think about it this way. Now, before you freak out, it is an equation. But this is one way that the theory of reasoned action is portrayed, is as an equation. BI, your behavioral intention, equals your attitude about performing the behavior combined with the weight or the importance about your attitude. Does your attitude matter more than all? In the case of getting a tattoo, my attitude was pretty positive, and that was ultimately the most important motivator, was that my affect towards getting it was great. That's the W. How important that component is to the individual. And then you add that with the subjective norm. How are others going to feel about that behavior? And combined with how important that component is. So it's the balancing act, right? It's adding things up, and if you get your behavioral intention is the result of a combination about the attitude and how important your belief is compared to what other people, specific other people, might think about and how important that is. That's the balance. So this is a good way to remember what the TRA is really about and how it combines everything. But like all theories have limitations. So like all theories, the theory of reasoned action has a few limitations. There's the question of goal intention versus behavioral intention. We may have the goal to lose weight. That might be a lofty intention, but that's an entirely different intention than our behavioral likelihood or our behavioral intent to eat better. We might say, hey, we're kind of chubby, I'd like to lose weight, but I don't like food that's good for me. So we can have a goal that could somewhere lead to behavior, but without the same behavioral intention, it doesn't matter. So the limitation with TRA is that it only looks at behavioral intention. It doesn't really consider what our overall goals are. It's only looking at what it is, what specific behaviors we plan on actually executing. A second limitation is that the available choice affects our intention, as well as thinking about the role the intention has in the behavioral performance. Let's put this in this way. One of the problems with McDonald's is its availability and cost in urban environments. So one of the reasons that people a lot of times in urban environments make really bad food decisions is based on what's readily available. If you live in, for example, downtown Poughkeepsie, there really isn't a good grocery store within walking distance of anywhere in downtown Poughkeepsie. You can catch the bus, you can have it delivered. But there certainly is a McDonald's and a whole slew of fast food and kind of ooky food choices, and they're cheap. So the available choice a lot of times will affect whether we intend to do something. I may want to eat better, but if the choice for the money, I can spend $2 a day, I can get something that's cheap and disgusting and still feel full rather than buying sometimes more expensive foods. Now, the role of intention and behavioral performance is another limitation. So, if what's available is pretty limited, then our intention doesn't really matter. I might intend to eat well, but if I don't have something that's good and that meets my financial needs, then the behavior isn't going to correlate with the intention. So there's a weakness there in terms of our actual ability to execute our behavioral intention. That's what this limitation is about, is our actual ability to execute the behavioral intention. So these limitations then mean that it's a good theory, it's a theory that's been well supported, but it's not a perfect theory. There's no perfect theory. So let's take a look at another limitation is that there's a difference between the intention and the expectation. So I may fully intend on someday living in a mansion, thus the picture on the left, but I don't actually expect to. We can have an incongruence in what we want, what it is that we have as a goal, and what we actually expect to do. It may be that I because I'm a professor, I may never expect to make a ton of money. True story, but that's a conversation for another day. but I may intend someday to live in that mansion. That incongruence, short of, winning the lottery, is one of the challenges with the TRA. We can intend on to do a lot of different kinds of behaviors, but sometimes we don't expect to do them effectively. Sometimes we don't expect to be successful. We'll still try because it's worth a shot. Buying a lottery ticket, it's worth a shot. Do we expect to win? Not unless, we're really bad at math. So that's a big part of understanding one of the limitations of it. So, in the end, when you understand the core limitations, those limitations being very simply that the TRA doesn't measure goal intention, it only measures and addresses behavioral intention, that our available choices can route around our intention to actual behavior, and that there's a difference between intention and expectation, we understand that it can be an effective and useful theory, but it has some distinctive limitations. So let's take a look at the applications of the theory of reasoned action. One has certainly been in advertising. There's a couple of studies that looked at coupons. So to what extent does a coupon actually affect your intention to go to, Carl's Jr.? You get this coupon and say, ooh, it's free, I can just get it. All I have to do is buy a medium drink and I can get the burger or the chicken sandwich. And as it turns out, that's one of the reasons that coupons are effective, is that they do change our behavioral intention. We might buy a product or we might go to a business that we had never planned on patronizing. Thus, this gives us a very good idea about one of the ways that we can affect behavioral intention is to offer a lure of some kind. A more common example of how the TRA is applied is in healthcare settings. Health campaigns specifically focusing on STDs and HIV. This is where, like I mentioned, a lot of the work on the theory of reasoned action has been put into place. In Africa, there's a friend of mine is doing research on the radio campaigns. The goal of the research is to help people view getting tested as more socially desirable. It is a campaign focused almost entirely on the subjective norms about HIV testing. Because of the substantial social stigma associated with being HIV positive. So one of the things that they have done in the course of this campaign is to develop a radio program. Now, before you kind of wonder about the radio programs, remember that radio in this country used to be, our form of soap opera. That used to be our major form of entertainment. Well, in a lot of places in Africa, that still is. In the very poor places, the places where HIV is most prevalent, the radio is still the central form of entertainment. So they will, most households or most villages will at least have a radio. So they do a radio program with people talking about HIV. They have characters, they follow them, they talk about the trials, the tribulations of being HIV positive, and they're trying to show it as being something that is normal. That you have support systems, etc. Because if you look at this graphic on the African map, this is talking about the density of HIV infection in Africa. So trying to identify the social norms and trying to manage those so that people get the treatment and people get the testing that they need is absolutely essential. So this is one of the very real applications, and probably the one both in the United States and abroad that has received the most work with the theory of reasoned action. There are other types of health campaigns, though, too. Exercise campaigns a lot of times use the theory of reasoned action to change people's attitudes, not so much the subjective norms, but a lot of times the attitudes. The one area on subjective norms that exercise campaigns sometimes address is whether we care about other people's impressions of us. We all like to create the illusion that we don't. But the reality is making it viewed much more as a socially desirable thing to do. Go exercise, make it a social event. Make it something that you do together. Family health campaigns, family exercise campaigns are really geared around that. It's also about changing people's attitudes, making it so that it's actually fun to get out and move. So there's a lot of applications, especially in the health communication context for these. Another common application in health is smoking cessation. The theory of reasoned action is used a lot in smoking cessation campaigns, making it look socially less desirable to smoke. If you remember a few years back, the tobacco industry, in particular Philip Morris, because they were mandated, not because they actually wanted to, but launched a fairly substantial campaign based on social desirability on youth smoking. The series of commercials that stuck with me the most is that have teens in a social situation. One kid would light up and then they suddenly have a face of a monkey transposed onto their head. They're showed as being socially undesirable. So the theory of reasoned action is used to really, a lot of the times, focus on that subjective norms component. And the final health campaign that this is used a lot with is in terms of binge drinking and alcohol campaigns targeted towards college-age students in particular. So across the gambit, whether we're talking about commercial campaigns or the more common one, health campaigns, we really get a sense that when we talk about attitudes, changing attitudes, and changing the subjective norm, the theory of reasoned action can be an effective campaign strategy, i.e., theory, to ground those campaigns. Alright, that's all for now, and more later.